Welcome to Boring Pastimes, where history moves at the pace of a candle burning down. Here, we leave behind the noise of battles and kings and wander quietly into the small, unhurried corners of the past. You'll walk the dusty roads between villages, linger in the echo of empty market stalls, and listen to the ordinary days that built our history. So, settle in. Let the voices of the past drift through your thoughts, and allow the weight of time to guide you slowly into sleep. Story 1. The village that time forgot to wake before the sun has fully risen, though in this time there is no alarm clock to jar you from sleep. The sound is subtler, soft murmurs from a nearby barn, the lowing of a cow that must be milked, and the distant creak of wooden cartwheels on frozen ruts. Outside the single-room cottage where you lie, the air is damp with the lingering chill of night. A faint smell of smoke and peat still clings to the thatched roof above. If you had opened your eyes, expecting the clean lines of the modern world's straight roads, uniform bricks, and glass panes, what greets you here would seem almost unfinished. The walls are not perfectly smooth, but wattle and daub, a lattice of sticks coated with a thick mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. It is warm enough for survival, but never entirely snug. In winter, drafts find their way in through the smallest cracks, and in summer, the flies have no trouble finding their way out. The first sound that reaches you in full is the scrape of a wooden latch and the uneven footsteps of someone crossing the yard. You can smell them before you see them, not unpleasant, but earthy, the scent of woolen clothes worn for days without washing. In a medieval village, water is not abundant. For bathing, a stream or a well provides all that is needed for drinking, cooking, and the occasional rinse, but not enough for daily immersion. Soap, if it exists at all, is coarse and costly, often made from animal fat and ashes. It leaves a faint film on the skin and a smell that clings. The shape of the village, the hamlet where you've woken, is not large. A dozen cottages gather loosely around a central green where the grazing geese are already pulling at tufts of grass. Beyond, the dirt path widens into a rough track, leading either toward the market town half a day's walk away or into the open fields that feed the village. There are no street signs. Here everyone knows where every path leads. At night, a stranger would be wise to stay put. Without moonlight, the roads are treacherous, and the woods that crowd their edges are more than simply dark dot in the center. Of the green stands the village's most important structure. Not a grand hall or a church, though the church is nearby, but the communal oven. Baking bread at home is risky and inefficient. The thatched roofs and open hearths make fire a constant threat, and it is better to keep the hot work to one supervised place. On baking days, the smell of fresh loaves drifts through the air, but this morning is not one of them. Today smells, instead of damp earth, the faint metallic temps of tools and livestock. Your first meal breakfast here is not the feast you might imagine. There is no coffee, no sugar, and certainly no fried eggs and bacon sizzling in a pan. What awaits you is pottage, a thick mixture of grains and vegetables boiled into something between soup and porridge. It has been cooking slowly over the hearth since yesterday, a portion taken out at night and the pot kept warm by the remaining embers. You dip a wooden spoon into the mixture. It is warm but bland, the taste of barley and cabbage, softened by long simmering. A pinch of salt, if the household can spare it, is a luxury. Food is measured carefully here. Most families are bound to the manor's lands, working strips of field in return for the right to farm small plots for themselves. The grain harvest in late summer sets the tone for the year ahead to little, and the winter months are lean, too much, and the Lord will still take his share. There is no thought of wasting a meal, for the memory of hunger is never far away. The work that fills the day as the sun rises higher, the village stirs. The smith begins work in his small, open-fronted workshop, the steady ring of hammer on iron echoing across the green. Children are sent to gather kindling from the hedgerows, keeping the hearths supplied. Women tend to small gardens, pulling weeds and checking the progress of leeks and onions. Men head into the open fields beyond the village boundaries, where the day's work is dictated by the season, plowing, sowing, or harvesting. The work is rarely hurried, but never ending. You might be sent to help with sheep shearing in the warmer months, your fingers quickly learning the rhythm of the shears. Or you could be tasked with turning the heavy millstone, grinding wheat into coarse flour. There is little division between your work and theirs. Survival is a shared effort, and one person's failure to complete a task could ripple through the entire community. Sounds of the afternoon by midday. The sun is high and the air warmer, though not entirely free. Of the dampness that settles in early morning, the clatter of wooden pails against the stone lip of the well punctuates the steady rhythm of daily labor. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows late, unbothered by the passing of morning. In the distance, you hear the measured toll of the church bell, not a call to prayer, but to mark the hours. The church is the most solid building in the village, built of stone rather than timber, its roof covered in thick wooden shingles. It stands on a slight rise, giving it the appearance of watching over the village. Inside, the air is cooler, heavy with the scent of beeswax and damp stone. The priest here serves as much a recorder of events as a spiritual guide, keeping track of baptisms, marriages, and deaths in careful Latin script. Few villagers can read, and fewer still can write, but the records give the community a sense of continuity. Evenings slow descentes, the light begins to fade. People return from the fields. The tools are cleaned and stored night out of concern for thieves. For everyone here knows one another, but because damp metal quickly rusts, livestock are penned for the night, their low voices adding to the soft chorus of the village settling. In smoke rises from every chimney, carrying the scent of the evening meal. The pottage from the morning might be reheated, perhaps with a scrap of meat added if the household is fortunate. Meat is rare, saved for holy days or special occasions. More often, the taste comes from herbs gathered in summer and dried for winter use. Meals are eaten with wooden spoons from shared bowls, bread torn by hand and passed around. Outside, the world darkens quickly. Without the light of torches or candles, both expensive night is something to be respected. People go indoors early, not from fear, but because the day has ended and the body demands rest. The quiet of the village at night is deep, broken only by the shifting of animals in their pens or the distant rustle of wind through the hedges. You lie again on the straw-filled mattress, the embers of the fire painting the ceiling with a faint orange glow. It is a simple life, one where each day resembles the last, but in that repetition lies its own form of security. And yet, as your eyes grow heavy, you can't help but wonder what happens here when the pattern is broken, when disease, famine, or war reaches even a village that time seems to have forgotten. The village, for all its quiet predictability, lives in a state of subtle vulnerability. Most days begin and end in much the same way: fields tended, livestock fed, meals shared. Yet beneath this calm surface is the knowledge that the entire rhythm can be broken by forces that arrive from beyond the hedgerows, beyond even the nearest market town. This morning is not unlike any other. But there's a whisper in the air, news carried by a peddler who stopped by late the previous night. His cart was loaded with tin cups, scraps of cloth, and the sweet scent of dried figs. He stayed only long enough to trade for a few coins and a hunk of bread, but his words lingered after he left. He spoke of sickness in a neighboring village, of oxen that refused to pull plows, of the manor's steward inspecting the harvest with a grim face. You don't yet know which of these things will matter most. In a place like this, where information travels more slowly than the seasons, truth and rumor mingle like water and ale. Still, the villagers sense a shift in the air. The first signs of famine comes. It announces itself quietly. The grain stores seem a little lighter than they should be for this time of year. Rats leave tiny droppings in the corners of the granary, and more than one sack is chewed open. The steward might send word that more grain must be sent to the manor house for safekeeping. Few believe it will return. If sickness comes, the signs are different, but no less subtle. A child stays in bed rather than chasing geese through the green. A woman leaves her laundry half finished, sitting instead by the hearth with her head in her hands. Coughing in the night carries far in a village this small, and if trouble comes in the form of conflict, it often begins with men on horseback, messengers from the Lord or his retainers, riding hard down the road, their cloaks dusty, their eyes darting at every movement in the hedgerows. Sometimes they carry letters sealed with wax. Sometimes they carry only orders spoken in clipped tones. Supplies will be needed. Men must be ready. The roads are to be kept clear. The manor's hand, the manor looms over the village, not as a physical building, though the Lord's Hall is certainly larger than any cottage, but as an ever-present authority. It is the manor that decides how much grain is owed in rent, how many days each villager must work the Lord's fields without pay, and what penalties will be levied for breaking the rules of the land. When times are good, the manor's demands are predictable, if not fair. When times are bad, they can become crushing. A poor harvest might mean not only hunger, but the selling of tools, the loss of seed grain, or even the forfeiture of a cow to pay rent. And the Lord's steward will still arrive, boots clean despite the mud, eyes measuring everything from the size of the woodpile to the number of hens in the yard. There is no real appeal. The church might offer charity in the worst of times, but its stores are also limited. And charity often comes with conditions. Coping with shortages. When food grows scarce, the villagers adapt, though it is a grim sort of adaptation. Acorns are gathered from the woods, their bitterness leached away in boiling water. Bread is stretched with ground peas or beans, making it dense and heavy. Pottage becomes thinner, more water than barley. People search for food in places they would never think to look in better years. Nettles in the hedgerows, roots from marshy ground, berries from thorny bushes. Even the smallest scraps are used. Stale bread softened in broth, fish bones boiled for their last trace of flavor. Hunger also makes tempers shorter. Disputes that might have been settled with a shrug become heated. The smell of a roasting chicken might draw neighbors to a door, their faces tight, their eyes lingering too long on the pot. Illness in the night, the sickness, when it comes, does not arrive with fanfare. There is no sudden cry from the church bell, no frantic gallop of a messenger's horse. Instead, it slips in quietly, someone coughing at the communal oven, someone too tired to finish their share of the weeding, without a physician nearby. Only perhaps a village-wise woman or healer amides are limited to herbal poultices, prayers, and rest. Most illnesses are survived, but some linger too long. Children are the most at risk, and when one child dies, the fear spreads faster than the sickness itself. There is no real isolation here. Families share a single sleeping space, livestock often just on the other side of the wall. If one falls ill, it is only a matter of time before others follow. Rumors and fear, by now, the whispers have grown. Some say the sickness was brought by the peddler. Others believe it came from the market town, carried in with sacks of flour. A few even mutter that it is God's punishment for sins unnamed. In the evenings, people gather around their hearths earlier, less eager to linger outdoors. The church bell tolls more often not for the hours, but for the dead. The green fields quieter, the geese less noisy. Even the smith's hammer seems to fall less often, as though the very air has grown heavier. A village on edge. The rhythms of the village are not gone, but they have shifted. Work continues, fields must be tended, animals fed, but there is a tenseness to every task. The laughter that once accompanied haymaking is gone. Neighbors pass each other on the path with only a nod. No one knows if the sickness will pass quickly, or if hunger will deepen before the spring planting. The peddler who brought the first whispers is long gone, his cart rattling towards some other village, carrying with it stories that will grow and change with each telling. You find yourself lying awake longer at night, listening to the coughs from the next cottage, the lowing of restless cattle, the creak of the wind against the walls. It is still the same village, the same thatched roofs, the same smoke rising from the chimneys, but the sense of safety has been replaced by something quieter and more unsettling. And you begin to wonder, in a place with so little protection from the wider world, how do people hold on when the hardships do not pass quickly? The first frost arrives earlier than anyone hoped. Thin ice forms overnight on the surface of the water troughs, brittle enough to break with a fingertip, but cold enough to remind everyone that the easy months are gone. Autumn had offered no abundance to store away. The granaries are already too light, the root cellars lacking the full baskets they should hold. What remains is guarded with quiet discipline. The miller measures each sack of grain before grinding, eyes narrowing when the weight is less than it should be. The steward makes his rounds more frequently, his ledger filling with marks and notes about who owes what. The church offers bread and ale to those in the direst need, but the queue outside its small door grows longer every week. The shape of survival in times like these Survival is not a matter of heroic acts, but of unending small efforts. The women boil nettles into soup, dry slivers of turnip near the hearth, and scrape the last marrow from bones to enrich broth. Men trap rabbits, and snares are set for birds, though game is quickly hunted thin. Children gather anything that might burn wigs, peat, dried dungan, their fingers red from the cold. The fields lie dormant under the frost, and so the work turns inward. Tools are mended, wool is spun, baskets are woven from willow cut in the autumn. Every pair of hands has a task, for idleness is dangerous, it wastes both time and morale. Losses in winter Linus claims more in winter than at any other time. Colds become fevers, minor wounds fester without proper cleaning. The healer's store of herbs dwindles, replaced with whatever can be gathered from the bare hedgerows, dried yarrow, bits of bark, and honey if it can be spared. When someone dies, the burial is swift. The earth is cold and hard, and the grave is shallow. The priest intones the familiar prayers, his breath clouding the air in front of him. There is no marble marker, only a wooden cross if the family has the means to make one. The loss is felt keenly, but life cannot pause for mourning. There are animals to feed, water to fetch, fires to keep burning. The return of trades sometime after midwinter. The distant clatter of a cart on the frozen road brings a stir of curiosity. A trader has braved the season, his wagon creaking under a patched canvas. He carries not only goods, but news how the sickness has fared in the towns, what prices grain fetches in the markets, whether any nearby lord has begun hiring men-at-arms. The trader's goods are few: salt, needles, lengths of dyed cloth, but even these seem almost exotic in the midst of scarcity. Salt is prized not for flavor, but for preservation. A family that can afford a small sack might save a bit of meat from spoiling. Cloth, too, has a practical purpose: patching worn tunics, mending sacks, reinforcing the knees of work trousers. Though few coins change hands, barter flows quickly. A cured rabbit pelt for a needle, a basket of dried beans for a handful of salt. The trader leaves by evening, his cart a little lighter, his purse a little heavier, his news already beginning to shift into rumor as it passes from one mouth to another. The first signs of spring. It is difficult to know exactly when winter loosens its grip. The snow melts in patches, but frost still lingers in the mornings. Then, one day, the first green shoots appear in the herb garden, a faint promise of what will come. The arrival of spring does not erase the hardships of winter, but it does change the work. The plow is brought out, its wooden frame inspected for cracks. Oxen are yoked and driven into the heavy, thawing fields. Seed grain, precious and guarded. All winter is measured and sown with steady hands. The villagers do not speak much of the winter just past. There is no sense in dwelling on what has been lost. Attention must turn to what can be gained in the months ahead. What endures? The church bell still marks the hours. The geese return to the green. Children laugh again, their games no longer interrupted by coughing fits. The pottage remains much the same, grains and greens, and whatever else can be spared. But the bowls are filled a little higher now. The hardships have not destroyed the village. A few cottages stand empty, their hearths cold, but most still. Smoke in the evenings. The people remain thinner, perhaps, more cautious in their hope, but alive. And perhaps that is the lesson of a place like this. Survival is not marked by triumph, but by the simple act of enduring. Each year brings its own troubles, famine, sickness, the demands of the manor, but so long as the fields are tilled, the hearths are lit, and the village holds together, life continues. You watch the sunlight stretch across the green, the familiar shapes of the cottages unchanged, and wonder if you were to leave this place and return years later, how much would be different, and how much would remain exactly the same, as though time itself had passed it by. The sun is low when the first guests arrive, their cloaks damp from travel, their horses steaming in the cool air. The drawbridge groans under their weight as they pass into the courtyard, greeted by a mix of stable hands and the stewards, sharp-eyed assistants. Servants hurry forward to take the visitors' cloaks and gloves, carrying them to the warmer chambers where the guests will rest before the meal, by the time the final arrivals have been announced. The torches in the great hall are already lit, their flames flickering against the polished shields on the walls. The hall smells of spiced wine, roasting meat, and fresh bread, with an undercurrent of beeswax from the candles that line the high table. The pageantry of seating, the guests enter in an order as carefully arranged as the meal itself. The most honored, perhaps a visiting knight, a neighboring lord, or a wealthy merchantar, led to the high table alongside the host. Lesser guests take seats further down the trestles, where the food will be simpler and the service less attentive. You notice how the seating shapes the conversation. Those near the high table speak in clear, measured tones, their words chosen, as much for what they leave unsaid as for what they reveal. Down the hall, laughter is freer, voices louder, and the occasional clatter of a dropped trencher goes without comment. The courses unfold. The first course is meant as much to impress as to feed. Platters of roasted fowl arrive, swans, with their feathers carefully reattached for display, peacocks with gilded beaks, and pheasants glazed with honey. The cooks have taken care to balance the flavors. Savory pies filled with minced meat and herbs, bowls of thick pottage, rich with root vegetables, and trenchers topped with slices of cheese between courses. Servants bring warm, spiced wine or ale in heavy goblets. The scent of cinnamon drifts above the table, mingling with the smoke of the hearth. Each serving is accompanied by a bow or a murmured phrase of deference. The choreography of the meal is as rehearsed as any dance. The music and the murmurs at one end of the hall. Musicians play lutes and flutes, their melodies rising and falling to match the tempo of the evening. Yet it is not the music, but the low hum of conversation that carries the most weight from the high table. You catch snatches of talk about land disputes, the price of wool, and the possibility of forming new alliances through marriage. Guests lean close to one another, voices low enough to be missed by most ears, but not by the lord's. His gaze drifts over the hall as he eats, noting who speaks with whom, who laughs together, and who pointedly avoids each other's eyes. The subtler exchanges, not all deals, are struck openly. A small folded parchment passes from one noble to another beneath the table, hidden by the sweep of a sleeve. At the far end, a merchant whispers an offer to the steward, who nods without committing. A lady at the high table receives a ring, its meaning known only to her and the man who pressed it into her palm. The banquet is a celebration, but it is also a marketplace of influence. Every shared dish, every exchanged glance, has the potential to shift loyalties. The end of the milas, the last course, is served sweet pastries filled with dried fruit and spiced wine reduced to a thick syrup. The tone of the hall changes. Guests lean back in their chairs, the urgency of conversation easing into softer tones. Some leave the table to stand by the hearth, warming their hands. Others join in the music, clapping in rhythm or singing in half-drunken harmony. The Lord rises only when he chooses the evening to be done. His departure signals the slow unraveling of the gathering. Guests follow in order of status, while servants immediately begin clearing the tables and banking the fire. The quiet returns when the hall is finally empty. The scent of the feast lingers in the air. The rushes on the floor are scattered with crumbs and the torches burn low. The musicians pack away their instruments. The servants carry the last of the platters to the kitchens, and the steward notes which stores will need replenishing. In the quiet corners, the castle exhales. The grandeur of the feast fades back into the daily rhythm water, to be hauled ash, to be swept, bread to be baked for the morning. Whatever promises were made or rivalries stoked tonight will echo far beyond these walls. But for now, the great hall stands silent, and as you step into the dim corridor, you wonder how many of the most important events in history were decided not on battlefields or in courts, but in moments like these, between bites of roasted meat and murmured words over spiced wine. It begins with a summons, not from the Lord himself, but from the steward, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who carries the weight of the castle's logistics on his shoulders. The message is simple. Guests will arrive within 2 days, perhaps 20 or more, and a banquet will be held in their honor. In a world without stocked pantries ready for such occasions, this announcement is less a pleasant change of pace and more an unspoken challenge. The castle's routine shifts at once. Tasks are reprioritized, supplies counted, and every able hand-weather servant, page, or cookies given a role. The kitchen stirs to life. The kitchens, already the busiest part of the castle, take on a hum of urgency. Large cauldrons are scrubbed clean, cleavers sharpened, and spits checked for damage. The head cook dictates orders to the scullions, who scurry out to fetch whatever ingredients can be gathered on short notice. The cook must make the menu fit both the available stores and the dignity of the Lord's table. Salted fish, preserved in barrels, will be soaked to remove the brine. Fowls will be plucked, their feathers saved for pillows. If the castle is lucky, a deer or wild boar may be brought in by the huntsman, a prize that will serve as the centerpiece of the feast. To achieve the layered flavors the nobility expect, spices are fetched from the Lord's private storeroom, pepper, cinnamon, saffron kept under lock and key. Each pinch is measured. These spices have traveled farther than most people in the castle ever will. The hall transformed in the great hall. Servants rearrange the trestle tables into a more formal configuration. The high table, placed on the dais, is dressed in linen, so fine it nearly shimmers in the firelight. Candles are set in polished holders, their flames to be lit just before the meal begins. On the floor, fresh rushes are laid, mixed with fragrant herbs such as lavender or rosemary to sweeten the air. Shields bearing the Lord's crest are polished and hung along the walls, a quiet reminder of the family's lineage. Even the benches and stools for lesser guests are inspected for sturdiness. No one wishes for the embarrassment of a collapsed seat during the toasts, the rush for supplies outside the walls. The steward's men ride to the nearby village and outlying farms, carrying with them both coins and authority. Chickens are purchased, casks of ale rolled back to the castle, and eggs collected in woven baskets. It is a small but significant disruption for the villagers. What they sell to the castle is often the best of what they have, and the sudden demand can leave them with little for themselves. In the market town, traders haggle over dried fruits, almonds, and fine cloth for napkins. News of the coming feast spreads quickly. There is always curiosity about who will be seated at the Lord's table and what alliances or disputes the gathering might signal. Practice and precision for the Lord's household staff. A banquet is not merely a meal, but a display of control and abundance. The cupbearer practices the ceremonial presentation of wine, bowing at just the right angle. Pages rehearse carrying trenchers flat pieces of stale bread used as plates without spilling their contents. Musicians tune lutes and shawms, checking the acoustics of the hall. Even the guards prepare. Their role is to stand watch during the meal, a living ornament of authority and readiness. Their armor is oiled, helmets buffed until they catch the torchlight. In the shadows. Not all preparations are for public view. In the castle's small dim rooms, seamstresses and tailors work quickly to repair or embellish the Lord's finest. Clothing embroidered hems are checked for loose threads, and buttons are tightened with hidden stitches. The lady's jewelry is polished, each piece laid out in the order it will be worn. There is also quiet political preparation. The chamberlain speaks in hushed tones with the steward about seating arrangements. Who will sit near the Lord? Who will be placed further away? In a banquet, proximity is a form of power. The final hours, the morning of the feast, the castle is a hive of motion. Fires are stoked before dawn, and the smell of roasting meat fills the air. The kitchen's stone walls drip with steam as sauces are stirred, pies are crimped, and bread bakes in long, golden loaves. The great hall gleams in the torchlight, and the servants, though tired from 2 days of constant work, move with careful precision. The guests have not yet arrived, but the castle feels different. Its quiet corners momentarily transformed into the unseen machinery of spectacle. And as you watch the last silver goblet placed at the high table, you can't help but wonder, when the banquet begins, will it serve only as a meal, or as the stage for negotiations and decisions that will echo far beyond these walls? Story 2. The castle's quiet corners. You wake in darkness. Though here it is not the soft quiet of a countryside cottage, but the cool, echoing hush of stone walls. The air is dry, tinged with the faint scent of rushes strewn across the floor and the smoke of last night's torches. Somewhere above, the wind sighs through narrow arrow slits, carrying the distant scent of the moda mix of algae, mud, and damp stone. The castle is not yet awake, at least not fully. In the great hall, the embers of the central hearth glow, sending up the occasional faint crackle. But in the servants' quarters, movement has already begun. For those who work here, the day starts long before the lord or lady stirs. The shape of the castle's layout is designed for defense, not comfort. Thick walls enclose an inner courtyard where rainwater collects in barrels and where the few green things that grow are kept in wooden tubs. Above the battlements stand watch, even at this early hour, guards shifting their weight to keep warm, eyes scanning the dark countryside for movement. Inside, the rooms are arranged in a vertical logic, storage and kitchens in the lower levels, living quarters above, and the private chambers of the lord and lady at the top. The higher the floor, the warmer and drier the air. Servants rarely linger in those upper rooms unless summoned. Most of their work happens in the low, dim places where heat from the hearth can be trapped and food prepared. The first tasks of the Datha castle's quiet is broken first by the scullion's young boys and girls, sent to clean the ashes from the great hall's hearth. They work quickly, carrying heavy iron shovels of ash to the courtyard, where the wind scatters the dust into the corners. The smell of yesterday's fire clings to their clothes. In the kitchens, the day begins with the hauling of water. It comes either from the castle's well, or more often, from the motho. Moat water must be boiled before use, and it brings with it a brackish temps. Great copper pots are set over the flames, steam beginning to curl toward the blackened rafters. Bread left to rise overnight is shaped and slid into the great oven. The sound of kneading is steady and unhurried, punctuated only by the scrape of a wooden bench against the flagstones. The hall before the feast, the great hall. The castle's heart is both public and private space. It is here that the Lord will hear petitions, hold meals, and conduct much of the business of the estate. Before any of that can happen, it must be made ready. The long trestle tables are scrubbed, their surfaces wiped with vinegar to kill the smell of yesterday's food. Fresh rushes, dried grasses, and herbs are scattered on the floor to absorb spills and mask odors. The high table, set on a dais, is dressed more carefully. Pewter plates are polished until they catch the early light, goblets wiped clean with linen cloths. A great chair, carved with the family's crest, is placed precisely in the center. With smaller chairs arranged for honored guests, the castle wakes the first stirrings of the noble household. Begin with the chamberlain climbing the stairs to the private quarters. His job is to ensure that the Lord's clothing is laid out, that the basin for washing is filled with fresh water, and that the bed curtains are drawn back to admit light. The Lord's personal attendants soften young men of noble birth, serving as pagesten, ready with warmed towels, a small luxury in this cold stone world. Elsewhere, the ladies' maids are already at work, untangling hair from braids worn overnight, laying out gowns, and bringing warm spiced wine to ward off the chill. The ladies' duties may not involve armor or patrols, but they are no less important, overseeing the household accounts, managing servants, and ensuring that the castle runs without disorder. Meals for the many breakfast in the castle is modest. By noble standards, more of a breaking of the night's fast than a grand meal. Servants eat first, quickly and in the kitchens, coarse bread dipped in broth, perhaps with a few scraps of cheese if the stores allow. Nobles dine later, on finer bread, sweetened wine, and perhaps fish or boiled eggs. All of it must be prepared and carried by hand. There are no wheeled carts in these narrow corridors. Servants move in single file, balancing trays and bowls. Each step is practiced. One does not trip in a lord's hall if one wishes to keep one's position. Life in the quiet corners, not all work in the castle is visible. Some servants spend hours in the laundry, bent over wooden tubs, hands raw from lye soap. Others are in the storerooms, counting barrels of ale, wheels of cheese, and sacks of grain. The armorer oils the hinges on helmets, sharpens swords that may never see battle, and checks the chainmail for broken links. These quiet corners are the true machinery of the castle. Without them, the lord's feasts would falter, the guards would go hungry, and the fires would burn out. Yet they are places where little changes from day to day, slow, steady rhythm of maintenance and preparation. A pause before the day unfolds by the time the sun is high enough to light the battlements. The castle is fully awake. The courtyard echoes with hoofbeats as messengers ride out. The kitchen fires burn hot. The great hall smells faintly of vinegar and bread, and the servants move with the calm efficiency of people who know that their work will only pause, never truly end. And yet, even in this world of constant activity, one wonders what happens in these quiet corners when the castle is not preparing for an ordinary day, but for something more demanding, a feast perhaps, or the arrival of guests from afar. The light begins to shift as the day tilts toward evening. In the cloister garden, the shadows grow long across the flagstones. The bell for vespers sounds its deep note rolling across the fields, and the monks set aside their tools, books, and quills. Vespers is a prayer of light and shadow, thanksgiving for the day that has passed, and a quiet acknowledgement of the night to come. The psalms are slower now, the chant more measured. Candles flicker against the stone walls, their small flames holding back the growing darkness. The evening meal after vespers. There is a final meal smaller than midday, usually bread and soup, sometimes with a little cheese or fruit from the orchard. It is taken in the same silence as before, the reader's voice once again threading through the air. The tone of the readings changes in the evening. Accounts of holy men and women, lessons from history, reminders of mortality. The day's work is nearly over, and the mind is drawn gently toward reflection. Compline, closing the Datha last formal prayer. Compline begins after the meal. The chapel is dimly lit. The candles throw long shadows along the carved choir stalls. The chant is low, almost like a whisper, shared among the walls themselves. The prayers ask for protection through the night, for peace in sleep, for deliverance from danger, both physical and spiritual. This is the last gathering before silence deepens into the stillness of rest, the great silence when Compline ends. The monastery enters what is called the Great Silence. From this moment until after matins in the early hours, no word is spoken unless necessary. Even a greeting is left unsaid. The halls feel different during these hours, emptier, though the same brothers walk them. Lantern light pools along the floor in patches, leaving the corners and high vaults in darkness. In the scriptorium, quills are put away. In the garden, tools are stacked neatly for the morning. Matins and the night watch, the day's rhythm does not stop at sleep. Several hours after Compline, the bell sounds again for matins, pulling the brothers from their beds. The chapel is cold at this hour, the air heavy with quiet. The chant here is slower still, the verses chosen for their meditative weight. After matins, some monks return to their beds. Others remain awake for the night watch, reading or praying by the light of a single candle. This vigil, in the heart of darkness, is a reminder that prayer and attention to the divine do not follow the clock of the outside world. The unending cycle by the time lauds arrives again, marking the beginning of a new day. The night's hours have folded back into the same pattern as before. Nothing in the schedule has changed. Nothing, it seems, ever will, and yet each day is subtly altered by the season, the weather, the presence or absence of travelers, the yield of the garden, the illnesses of the community. The life of the monastery is like the tide, predictable in its rhythm, but always carrying something new in its current. The bell will continue to sound, drawing the brothers to prayer, to work, to rest, and to watchfulness. And you may find yourself wondering, does the unbroken routine bring the monks closer to eternity, or does it simply allow them to lose track of time altogether? The bell sounds again, and the brothers file into the chapel for lauds, the morning prayer. The light is stronger now, streaming in through the high, narrow windows. The chant rises in slow, steady waves, and though the words are unchanged from yesterday or the week before, they settle over the mind in a way that feels freshly deliberate. When lauds ends, the silence is still in place. The community disperses to the day's assigned labors. For the next several hours, each man will work at a task that, while humble, sustains the entire monastery. The day is not designed for personal ambition, it is designed for collective endurance. Fields and gardens beyond the cloister walls. The gardens stretch toward the edge of the property. They are not ornamental. Every patch of soil is given over to something useful. Rows of cabbages, leeks, and beans stand alongside medicinal herbs, sage, fennel, rosemary, and rue. The work is slow and careful. Monks in woolen habits bend over the beds, their hands chilled from the morning air. A brother with a hoe clears the earth of weeds. Another prunes the apple trees. Each movement is purposeful. Each plant is part of a broader system that must be maintained season after season. The monastery's survival depends on this constant tending. There are no trips to a market for emergency provisions, no quick remedies if the crop fails. The guest house and almenrina tall who come to the monastery are monks. A steady trickle of travelers passes through merchants, pilgrims, and the occasional lost farmer seeking shelter for the night. The guest house, located just outside the main cloister, offers food and a place to sleep, in keeping with the rule of hospitality. Nearby is the almonry, where the poor of the surrounding villages come to receive bread or clothing. The almoner, a monk appointed to this duty, oversees the distribution. There is no public display of charity here, no speeches, no coins tossed for show. The work is quiet, repetitive, and constant, its effects often invisible. The scriptorium. At midday by late morning, the scriptorium is warmer, the sunlight falling across the desks. A brother pauses to sharpen his quill with a penknife, the faint rasp of metal on feather breaking the silence. Another monk leans close over the page, his hand steady as he inks a line of illuminated script. These manuscripts are more than books. They are repositories of memory. Some contain scripture, others medical treatises, others fragments of ancient philosophy. Without this careful labor, the words would vanish when the last voice to speak them fell silent. A single blot of ink can ruin hours of work, so the rhythm here is slow. Deliberate teach page, a quiet argument against the erosion of time. Sext, the midday pause, when the bell calls for sext. The brothers set aside their tools and pens. The noon prayer is short, but it divides the day cleanly in two. Afterward comes the main meal, eaten in the refectory under a rule of silence. One monk reads aloud from a book while the others eat, his voice steady and measured. The topics: very lives of saints, moral treatises, practical advice from ancient authors, but the effect is always the same: nourishment for the mind, alongside the body. The meal itself is plain: bread, vegetables, cheese, sometimes fish, water, or ale is served. There is no meat unless illness or special circumstances allow it. The monks eat slowly, each bite measured, the clatter of wooden spoons on bowls the only interruption to the reader's voice. The afternoon's labor after the meal. There is a brief period of rest, then the work resumes. In summer, the heat may drive the brothers to tasks, indoors mending robes, preparing parchment, grinding pigments for manuscript illumination. In winter, the cold presses in through the stone walls, and the fires must be tended constantly to keep ink from freezing on the quills. In all seasons, the work is repetitive. The same furrows are turned, the same lines copied, the same herbs gathered. Yet within this repetition lies a strange freedom. The mind, freed from the pressure to choose what to do next, can dwell on scripture, memory, or the quiet contemplation of the present moment. Hidden burdens to live here is not to escape difficulty. The body still tires from long hours of labor. The hands still ache from cold. The eyes strain from dim light. Illness can sweep through the cloister quickly, and though the herb garden offers remedies, they are not always enough. There are also the burdens of obedience, to accept the abbots, decisions without argument, to follow the rule without deviation, to place the needs of the community above one's own. This surrender is not without its struggles, even for those who have lived here for decades. As the afternoon bell rings for none, you find yourself wondering, does the order of the monastery protect the brothers from the chaos of the outside world? Or does it simply enclose them in a different kind of struggle, quieter but no less demanding? Story 3. The monastery bellet is still night when you first hear it's a low, steady toll of the bell. The sound rolls through the stillness, cutting through the mist that clings to the fields around the monastery. There is no urgency in its rhythm. It is not a summons for danger or alarm. It is simply the call to begin another day, as it has done for decades, perhaps centuries. You rise in darkness. The cell where you sleep is bare. A narrow wooden bed, a woolen blanket, a small table with a single candle. The air is cool enough that your breath clouds faintly as you move. The habit you pull over your head is coarse but warm, its weight a reminder of the life you've chosen, or perhaps the life chosen for you. The first office the bell does not ring just once. It marks the start of matins, the first of the canonical hours. When the brothers gather in the chapel to pray, you join the others, their shadows stretching across the cloister as the lanterns sway in their hands. No one speaks. The sound of sandals against stone echoes softly between the arches. The chapel is dim, lit by a few candles and the faintest glow from the east. The prayers begin, chanted in Latin, the voices blending into a single, measured tone. The words are ancient, unchanging, repeated so often they seem to belong more to the walls than to the men who speak them. Silence and structure when the service ends. The monks return to their cells or to the work assigned for the early morning hours. Silence is still kept. The rule of the order allows speech only when necessary, and even then it is often done in whispers or gestures. This discipline shapes the mind, focusing it inward, reducing the distractions of idle talk. But silence does not mean idleness. Already, some brothers tend to the fire in the kitchens. Others move toward the scriptorium, where the day's copying will begin. A few make their way to the gardens, tools in hand, to check the herbs and vegetables before the sun rises fully. The scriptorium. You enter the scriptorium, a long room with tall, narrow windows that admit the first light of day. The desks are arranged in rows, each with a sloped surface for holding parchment. The smell of ink and vellum hangs in the air, mingling with the faint tang of candle smoke. Here, patience is as much a skill as literacy. The copying of a single manuscript can take months, sometimes years. Every letter must be formed with care, every margin measured. Mistakes are scraped away with a knife, the surface smoothed again before the correct words are written. It is a task both meditative and painstaking, and it is through this work that the monastery preserves not only scripture, but histories, commentaries, and fragments of ancient knowledge. The kitchen fires elsewhere. The kitchen comes alive. Fires are stoked, kettles hung over the flames, bread pulled from the ovens. Breakfast will be simple, often just bread and ale, or thin pottage but even. Here, the day's rhythm is maintained. The cook works without waste. For the monasteries, stores must last through the seasons. Food is part of the monastery's discipline. 2. Plain, sufficient, and never indulgent. The brothers eat not for pleasure, but for strength to continue their duties. Yet even in this restraint, there is loaves baked evenly, herbs chosen to bring subtle flavor to the otherwise plain broth. The rule of the bellin, the monastery. Time is not kept by the sun alone. The bell marks each division of the day, calling the brothers to prayer, to work, to meals, to rest. It is the heartbeat of the community, steady and unchanging. For those outside the monastery walls, the bell might seem an intrusion into daily life. For those within, it is the very structure of existence. The sound tells you where you must be and what you must be doing. It frees you from deciding how to spend your time because time is already spoken for. The rising light has, the sun, finally, crests the horizon. The frost on the grass catches the light, and the mist begins to lift from the cloister gardens. You see the brothers moving through the covered walkways, their habits brushing against the stone columns. Some carry tools, others books, others simply their own thoughts. The day ahead will hold labor, prayer, and silence in equal measure. There will be no surprises, no diversions, only the repetition of a pattern that has been followed for generations. And yet, as the bell tolls again, you find yourself wondering, does such a life strip away the self, or does it, in its constancy, allow a person to discover it more completely? Story 4. The Market that never slept. Section 3. After the stalls close by. The time the sun dips behind the western walls of the town, the market's noise has thinned. The stallholders begin the slow process of packing up, baskets emptied, bolts of cloth rolled and tied, leftover bread wrapped in cloth or sold at a discount. Wooden shutters close over counters, and the smell of trampled herbs, spilled grain, and animal musk lingers in the air. The crowd has shifted too. Families and daytime shoppers are gone, replaced by stragglers looking for a cheap meal, travelers seeking a bed, and those whose business begins only after the main trade ends. The tally and the weighing in the fading light. Merchants gather in the guild hall to tally their earnings. The clink of coins is muffled here, counted and weighed on large scales to ensure no clipped or counterfeit pieces have slipped through. Accounts are scratched into ledgers, and disputes about stall space or fees are quietly discussed with the market wardens. These sessions are less lively than the marketplace outside, but they're just as important. Without the nightly reckoning, the market's order could not survive the push and pull of so many competing interests. The return journey beyond the gates. Those who live in the countryside start their journey home. Some drive carts heavy with purchases. Others carry loads on their backs. The road is busier than it will be at any other time of day. A slow-moving line of people and animals fading into the dusk. Along the way, side deals are made, will traded for tools, grain exchanged for promised labor. These are arrangements that don't pass through official hands, and no ledger will ever record them. The market's shadow economy. As darkness falls, the square doesn't fall silent. Instead, the nature of trade changes. In one corner, under a hanging lantern, a fur trader spreads his goods for customers who prefer to buy unseen. A brewer delivers a keg to the back door of an alehouse, avoiding the town's licensing rules. Sometimes, these after-hours trades are about avoiding taxes. Other times, they are simply about privacy. A craftsman selling tools to a rival guild. A farmer offering grain to a baker who pays in favors rather than coin. Such exchanges keep the market alive in ways the daylight never shows. The tavern as marketplace, the true heart of the night market, beats inside the taverns. Here, the wooden tables become negotiating spaces. Merchants trade news over mugs of ale. Travelers offer goods brought from distant towns. Deals are sealed with handshakes and drinks rather than written contracts. The air is thick with pipe smoke. The noise a tangle of laughter, arguments, and songs. It is a different kind of commerce, one where the value of a man's word is tested immediately, and fortunes can turn on whether a promise is kept by morning. Night watch and quiet streets by the time the town watch makes its rounds. Most of the market's visible trade has ended. Lanterns swing at the ends of their poles, casting brief flashes of light on shuttered stalls and empty carts. A few stragglers hurry home. The rest are already inside, asleep or still talking by the fireside. Yet even as the watchmen pass, you can hear the muted sound of movement in alleyways, the closing of a deal, the shifting of goods from one hand to another. The market's life has simply gone underground for the night. The cycle will repeat tomorrow. The stalls will open again, the crowd will swell, and the same square will host the same voices, but behind the routine there will always be a second rhythm, quieter, harder to see, and you might wonder, is the market truly a place, or is it a living thing, sustained not just by coins and goods, but by the countless unspoken agreements that pass between its people? Story 4. The Market That Never Slept. Section 2. The midday crowd. By the time the sun stands high above the rooftops, the market has swelled into its full voice. Stalls that were quiet in the morning now hum with overlapping chatter, the kind that turns individual words into a single rolling sound. The air has warmed, carrying with it the smell of animals, wood smoke, fresh bread, and the faint but constant hint of tanned leather. The press of people, it's hard to move in a straight line now. The lanes between stalls have narrowed to single file in places, as buyers stop to inspect goods or haggle. Elbows brush, carts jostle for space, and the call of a hawker rings out right beside the clink of a coin purse. The crowd is a mixed townsfolk, in rough wool tunics, merchants in better dyed fabrics, and a scattering of wealthier customers wearing furs or cloaks lined with fine cloth. You notice that even the richest must navigate the same cramped lanes as everyone else. No one is exempt from the market's slow shuffle, gossip and slow shuffle. Gossip and flash news. The market is as much about goods in the open space by the fountain. A traveling storyteller has gathered a ring of listeners. His tales blend local news with rumor, and you're never quite sure which is which. From one group of buyers, you overhear that the road south is unsafe. Robbers have been spotted near the bridge. From another, you hear that a lord in the next county has died, leaving his heir in debt. Such whispers shape buying decisions more than one might think. A farmer might stock up on salt if he believes a road will be closed, or a merchant might raise prices if he hears about shortages elsewhere. The food sellers. By midday, the scent of hot food is irresistible. Small vendors set up near the edges of the square, selling pies filled with minced meat or fish, skewers of roasted meat, and bowls of thick stew. Bread, trenchers flat, rounds of coarse bread, are sold alongside, used both as plate and food. Ale is sold in wooden mugs, ladled out from barrels. It's weak compared to what will be drunk in the evening, meant to refresh without muddling the senses. Some sellers offer cider, its sharp tang a relief on a warm day. The transactions you don't see at first. Amid the open trade, quieter deals unfold. Near the back wall of the square, two men talk in low voices over a sack whose contents are not displayed. A few coins change hands, and the sack is carried away quickly. This could be something harmless, a batch of early apples, perhaps, but it could just as easily be smuggled goods, avoiding both tolls and questions. In a corner near the church, a money changer works under a makeshift awning. Travelers bring him coins from other towns, and he weighs each one carefully on a small set of brass scales. His rates are not posted, they are whispered. The struggle for fairness. Not every transaction ends in agreement. Near the fishmonger's stall, a loud argument breaks out when a buyer accuses the seller of short weight. The town official overseeing the market steps in, checking the scales against a standard kept in the guild hall. This time, the fishmonger is found in the right, and the buyer walks away, muttering. The market animals are as much a part of the market as the people. Chickens cluck from wicker cages, goats pull against their tethers, and pigs root noisily at the ground. a drover leads a small herd of sheep through the square, their hooves clattering on the stones. This is both commerce and spectacle. Children follow the animals, pointing and laughing, until they are shooed away. The slow turn toward afternoon as the sun begins to tilt westward. The pace starts to shift. Those who came early are already heading home, goods piled high in baskets or balanced on shoulders. The serious buyers have mostly made their choices. Now the latecomers wander, picking through what remains. But the market's story is far from over. In the quieter hours after midday, different kinds of trade emerge, ones that do not rely on the noise of the crowd and whose deals may linger long after the stalls have been packed away, and you may find yourself wondering, is the market's true business done in the open, or is its most important work always hidden just out of sight? Story 4. The Market That Never Slept. Section 1. The first carts arrive before the sun touches the rooftops. The market square is already alive. You hear the rumble of wooden wheels over cobblestones, the creak of cart axles, and the muted snorts of donkeys and oxen. The air smells faintly of damp earth, staking out their familiar spots. There's no paint on the stalls, no bright banners, just rough planks, hammered together, covered with faded cloth to shield the goods from the weather. Some sellers work from simple carts, the wheels blocked with stones, their wares displayed on the flatbed. Others spread a blanket directly on the ground, setting out what they have: a few bundles of herbs, a stack of eggs, a pile of coarse wool. The market square as the town's heart in a medieval town. The market square isn't just a place to buy and sell. It's where news travels. A farmer might trade a sack of barley for a jug of cider, and, in the process, learn that a neighboring village lost half its wheat crop to early frost. A peddler might sell tin spoons and pick up a rumor about a new toll on the main road. The market is also a kind of clock for the town. Its noise swells and fades with the day, and its weekly cycle marks time in a way church bells alone cannot. On market day, everyone comes to town, rich, poor, local, and stranger alike. Stalls and wares you walk the rows, noting the variety. There's a butcher, his block already slick with fat, cutting salt pork for a customer. Next to him, a fishmonger lays out eels in a shallow tub of water, their bodies still twisting further down. A woman sells bread baked that morning, the loaves still warm under their cloth covering. The crusts are thick and dark dry. Mostly, though, she keeps a small stack of finer white loaves for customers who can afford them. In one corner, a tanner displays leather belts and pouches, their smell strong enough to keep most buyers at arm's length. The weaver across from him sells rolls of homespun wool, dyed in the dull but serviceable shades that vegetable dyes allow: browns, faded greens, soft yellows. The sound of the market is never truly quiet here. Even in the earliest hours, the shouts of vendors mix with the braying of animals, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer somewhere down the lane, and the clatter of goods being unloaded. Bargaining is constant. A woman buying cheese presses for a lower price, pointing out that the rind is cracked. A man selling iron nails refuses to drop his price, reminding the buyer that the river crossing ahead is charging tolls, meaning everything will cost more soon. The people who pass through, not everyone here is a permanent resident. Traveling merchants pass through on their way to larger towns, carrying items from far-off places, a handful of spices from the south, a bolt of fine cloth from across the sea, a little tin or copper mined in distant hills. These traders often move quickly, eager to sell before the goods spoil or are taxed at the next gate. Begging is common, too. The poor, the sick, and the elderly often sit near the square's edges, hoping for a coin or a crust from the more fortunate. They are part of the scene so familiar that regular market-goers know them by name. The market and authority. The market does not run on chaos alone. It is overseen by the town's officials, who enforce the rules. Scales must be fair, bread must meet the required weight, and stalls must stay in their allotted spaces. Fines are issued for cheating, though some merchants are skilled at avoiding notice. The market toll paid by each seller for the right to trade goes to the town or the lord who controls it. This is one reason markets thrive only under charters. Without legal permission, a gathering like this could be shut down or taxed to ruin. The flow of the day as the morning brightens, the square grows more crowded. Children weave between stalls, chasing one another or carrying small errands for parents. The smell of cooking sausages sizzling on an iron plate, bread toasting over coals big, is to drift through the air. This is just the start. By midday, the market will be at its noisiest and most colorful, the goods at their freshest, and the gossip at its most lively. And you may find yourself wondering, in a world without clocks in every home, does the rhythm of a market tell time better than any hourglass? The middle part of any journey between villages is the least glamorous, yet it is here that the rhythm of travel sets in. You stop noticing every detail and instead become part of the moving landscape. The road is no longer new, but neither is your destination close enough to pull you forward with urgency. When the road levels out, once the excitement of departure fades, the day's pace becomes steady. The road is worn but familiar, lined with hedgerows that act as both guide and barrier. In the warmer months, they are thick with green leaves, occasionally broken by a gap where livestock pass through. In winter, they stand bare and brittle, revealing far-off fields and the smoke of distant cottages. The surface underfoot changes, often sometimes compacted dirt, sometimes gravel, laid down by local lords to keep the way passable. In the wet season, these stones sit in puddles that are impossible to avoid. Boots soak through early, and you simply learn to walk with the weight of water in them. Passing the unseen villages, many medieval roads skirt smaller hamlets without ever entering them. You see the signs fields neatly plowed, the faint ring of a bell, smoke rising in tidy lines, but the path curves away. These places belong to themselves, and unless you have business there, you keep moving. There's a certain comfort in these glimpses of life at a distance. They are reminders that the world is filled with other journeys, other roads you'll never walk. Encounters with messengers and traders. The most purposeful travelers you meet are the messengers. They move quickly, often on horseback, with satchels tied shut and eyes fixed forward. A nod is all you get, if that. For them, the road is less about passage and more about time. Traders are different. They move in small caravans, their carts stacked high with good salt, cloth, tools. They tend to stop and talk, partly to rest their animals and partly to gather news. Conversations drift from weather to road conditions to rumors about the price of grain in the next market town. The waystone and the halfway point. Every so often you come across a waystone, sometimes carved with distances, sometimes just a plain block set upright. The halfway point is not always marked, but when it is, it's an occasion for a brief rest. You may share bread with a fellow traveler here, or refill your water if a stream runs nearby. These stops are rarely long too much. Sitting stiffens the legs, and daylight is always worth preserving. The quiet hazards, while bandits and wild animals are part of road legends, the more common dangers are smaller and quieter. A twisted ankle from a hidden rut, illness from drinking bad water, the steady drain of energy from walking too far without food. Travelers keep an eye out for these risks, adjusting their pace, choosing when to rest, and sharing what they can with others in need. Small kindnesses, half an apple, a scrap of cloth for binding a blister are the kind of transactions that never make it into any record, but keep the road's community alive. When the sky turns, the middle miles often pass beneath a changing sky. Clouds may roll in, dimming the light. Rain, when it comes, is endured rather than avoided. There's little shelter between villages. Travelers pull their cloaks tight, hunch forward, and walk on. In fine weather, the road can feel endless in another way. The sun moves slowly, shadows lengthen, and the urge to stop grows stronger with each passing hour. Approaching the next stop, after hours of repetition, signs of the next village begin to appear. Better kept fences, fields edged with low stone walls, and eventually the sound of dogs barking ahead. The road widens, and ruts become deeper from the heavier traffic near settlements. Even if you are not staying there, reaching the next village is a milestone. It marks the passing of one stage and the start of another. The middle miles teach patience more than anything else. You learn the measure of your own endurance, the value of pace, and the quiet companionship of strangers who are for a short time walking the same way you are. But as you near the next stop, you may begin to wonder, how will the journey change as night draws near and the road belongs only to those who must keep moving? By the time the sun has dipped low enough to set the tops of the trees glowing, every traveler still walking feels the same quiet urgency. Villages grow cautious at night. Gates close, if there are gates at all, and the countryside becomes a different place. The shift in sound, the road that once rang with carts, footsteps, and voices, now begins to fall silent. The calls of birds fade into the rustle of night creatures, hedgehogs moving through undergrowth, foxes slipping unseen across the path. From far away, you might hear the faint toll of a church bell marking the hour, though its sound feels strange out here, detached from the place it belongs to. Your own footsteps begin to sound louder in your ears, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot makes you glance into the trees more often. The last stragglers, if you meet anyone now, it's either someone hurrying home or someone with no home to hurry to. Farmers carry tools over their shoulders, heads bent forward, eager to see their cottage door. A lone peddler might push on toward the next village, hoping to arrive before the gatekeeper has retired for the night. Few stop to talk. The sense of shared purpose on the road gives way to quiet nods, as if words might slow the journey. Fires in the distance, in the open stretches. You might catch sight of small fires shepherds, watching their flocks, or travelers who have chosen to camp instead of pressing on. Smoke hangs low in the cooling air. Camping by the road is not ideal, but sometimes the choice is between sleeping in the open or arriving too late to be welcomed into a village. Those who camp tend to choose a slight rise in the land or a hollow near a stream, places where the firelight won't carry too far. The night watch of villages. As you approach a settlement after dark, you'll likely be met by the night watch. These are not soldiers in the grand sense, but townsmen taking turns to guard the gates or watch the paths. They'll want to know who you are, where you've come from, and what business you have. If the village is small and unfortified, the watch may simply be an old man with a lantern and a staff, standing by a low fence. But the questions are the same, and the decision to let you in rests with him. When the gates close, larger villages with walls or palisades close their gates at sunset. Arrive too late, and you will spend the night outside. This is one of the reasons medieval travelers rise early. There is nothing pleasant about sleeping exposed on the road, though it is sometimes unavoidable. If you do sleep outside, you keep your belongings close, cloak pulled tight, and a small fire if you can manage it. The night is colder and longer than you expect. The roads, other travelers, not everyone who moves after dark is welcome in. The villages, poachers, smugglers, and thieves prefer the cover of night. They know the paths and hedgerows well, often avoiding the road entirely. You may never see them directly, but you might notice the broken fence where they passed, or hear the distant sound of a cart where no cart should be. Arrival under stars. If you are lucky enough to reach your destination, the relief is immediate. A gate opened, a lantern raised, and the familiar smell of cooking fires inside the village walls greet you. Even the most modest cottage feels like a haven when compared to the empty road. Inside, you might find a bed in the common room of an inn, or simply a space on the floor by the hearth. Either way, the journey pauses here, wrapped in the sound of voices and the comfort of being among people again. Night on the road reminds you of its truth. Travel is not just about distance, but about timing. The same stretch of earth can feel open and friendly in daylight, and cautious, even threatening, once the sun is gone. And so you might wonder how many more journeys were shaped not by where the road went, but by the hour in which it was walked. Story 5. The road between villages. The morning begins with the kind of light that makes everything look faintly damp. Even if it hasn't rained, the road stretching ahead is not much more than a pair of worn ruts cut into the earth by countless wagon wheels, bordered by grass and low shrubs. Between towns, travel is slow, deliberate, and most of the time uneventful. If you were walking it, you would set out just after dawn. Most travelers prefer the early start, when the air is cool and the day's noise hasn't yet settled in. You might have a staff in your hand, a small bundle of possessions tied to it, or, if you're fortunate, a cart and a mule to carry your load. The pace of the road on average. A person can walk about 2 or 3 miles an hour, though the terrain often makes that ambitious. Mud, loose stones, or deep ruts can slow you to a crawl. Carts move no faster, their wooden wheels creaking and jolting over every uneven patch. The road is not a place for rushing, it's a place for persistence. Small markers, sometimes just upright stones or rough wooden posts, appear every so often to reassure you that you are still on the right path. Companions and encounters you rarely travel entirely alone. The road draws together strangers headed in the same direction, forming temporary groups for safety. These are not formal arrangements, just a shared awareness that numbers make one less appealing to thieves or wild animals. On the way out of town, you might pass a merchant with a pack horse, a farmer leading a pig to market, or a monk carrying a satchel of letters. Sometimes you trade a word or two. Sometimes the journey is silent, each traveler lost in their own thoughts, waypoints and crossroads every few miles. The road passes something that anchors it to memory: a small chapel, a stone cross, a stand of tall trees. These landmarks help you keep track of progress, though the distances between them can feel longer than you expect. Crossroads are more complicated. Signposts are not always present, and when they are, the carved letters may be weather-worn or partly missing. Often, the safest way to choose a direction is to wait for another traveler and follow their lead, hoping they know the way better than you do. Provisions on the Mufu is simple and portable: a chunk of coarse bread, some hard cheese, dried fruit if you're lucky, a skin of ale or water hangs at your side. Eating is done on the move or while sitting on a roadside stone. Meals are more about keeping up energy than enjoying flavors. There are no shops along most stretches, so you plan ahead. If your supplies run low, you might stop at a farmhouse to ask for food, offering a coin or small service in return. Sometimes you are turned away, sometimes you're invited in. The sounds of the road, what you hear, depends on where you are. In open fields, it's the wind moving through grass and the distant sound of livestock. In wooded stretches, the air is filled with bird calls, the crack of twigs underfoot, and the occasional rustle of something you can't see. Human sounds carry far on quiet days: wagon wheels in the distance, a voice calling to an animal, the hammering of a far-off blacksmith. These faint noises tell you that the world continues around you, even if the road itself feels empty. Reaching the first resting place by early afternoon, most travelers plan for a stop. This could be a village with an alehouse, a small roadside inn, or simply a clearing where fires can be lit without trouble. Resting is not just for comfort, it's about safety. Tired travelers make easy targets, and stumbling in the dark is an invitation for injury. Even the most experienced roadwalkers know better than to press on too late in the day. Night changes the road, and those who travel after dark usually do so for urgent reasons. The road stretches ahead, leading to the next village, the next meal, and the next set of conversations with strangers you may never meet again. But as you walk, you might begin to wonder what exactly happens in the long stretches between these resting places, when the road is at its emptiest, and the only company is the rhythm of your own footsteps. You've been listening to Boring Past Times together. We've wandered through roads, markets, and days long gone, the kind of history that rarely makes it into the grand stories, but shaped the world in quiet, unseen ways. May the slow rhythm of the past follow you into the stillness of your dreams. Until we meet again, sleep well.